Now, let's first of all talk about the market and your thoughts on the movement we've seen. Like I mentioned, today was up 0.8%, adding to the gains of last week. It seems like there's more positivity, there's more optimism right now. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, well, that's the case. Two things to sort of be aware of. So you have sort of the first question is why this rally, and the fundamental answer to that is no one's really sure. So we had sort of the risks that we're all aware of before today. Things like what's the polity doing, the political system. Things like what is the foreign exchange doing. Things like just the basic level of growth in the country. Now, none of these risks are really abated either for good or for bad. So the fundamental reason for this rally is sort of still a miss, as it were. But having said that, if you look at today's rally, for example, two things particularly impressed me. The first was the volume that we saw. So if you look at last week's rally, we had about, in total for the week, it was about 11 billion naira worth of trades that went up. Today alone, we had 5 billion naira today. I mean, a very big Nestle trade went up, but I mean, the volume is very good. The second thing that impressed me was the fact that of the five major names, there was only one banking stock, which was UBA, that sort of contributed to the market. So in some sense, the rally is sort of broad-based and, has some, strength to it. But having said that, I mean, if you also drill deeper, you find that some of the names in there, particularly the banks, I mean, you're talking Access Bank, Stanbic, Diamond, they're up about 30% from the September lows, for example. So even though there's, some pretty decent value in there, you need to pick your stocks wisely in this market.
I mean, you just emphasized where some of these stocks are coming from. So do you think profit taking is around the corner?
Absolutely. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, like I said, a banking stock is up 30% from September. Without a doubt, it's probably time, at least if I were the investor, to think about locking some of that in. Because especially, like I said, there's still some major risks in the market that really haven't been accounted for. Having said that, you have a name like GTB that in this rally is still trading single-digit price to earnings, which is pretty impressive or which is pretty attractive. So in some sense, I expect to see some sort of rotation within sectors and, outside of sectors as well.
Yeah, I think many will agree with you that valuation is definitely attractive in Nigeria right now. But let's move on to, of course, one of the big news coming out today. Dangote Cement, it's listing. We know next week, Tuesday, that counter will be listed on the NSE.
Correct.
I want to get your thoughts, particularly on the valuation, because some have raised some concerns about it being a bit aggressive, while others think it's simply a reflection of the potential of the broader cement industry, and of course, Dangote Cement as a group.
That's a good point. Well, I guess let me start with the positives of sort of the announcement and the merger. The first is one of the basic characteristics of any good stock market is one of liquidity and depth.
Yeah.
So one thing that this merger and this arrangement does right off the bat for the market is it brings us liquidity and depth, right? So you're talking about the market increasing by some 30%, strictly from a market capitalization angle. That's one. The other thing that this does is that it just sort of diversifies the market in some sense. So while banking stocks used to be sort of the big boys in quote of the stock market, you have a major player in the market now, which is also becoming visible. Ashaka Cement, was heavily traded today, for example. So in some sense, that's very big positives for the market. In terms of the negatives, you talk about the valuation. You're right. I mean, it's very, very expensive. Expensive in the sense that behind those numbers are some very aggressive sort of utilization rates that the market is pricing into that. For example, it's probably assuming a 95%, at least north of 95% utilization of sort of the factories, the things coming on board and the current, sort of capacity they have. That I think is very aggressive. The other thing it's assuming in there is that they can ramp up sort of the factories that they're working on now, expecting that within a year, like the Besha plant that they're, sort of in the pipeline, they're assuming that that's going to come, onto play as planned and as targeted. That I think is also aggressive. So in some sense, from that angle, I think, that's sort of the negatives of the whole story. But I think it sort of balances itself out, the positives.
But that's not taking anything away from the potential of the cement sector, which I think everyone has played up. Can you just give us your thoughts on that in terms of how you see the cement industry as a whole? Some have said it has grown about 15%, 10% on average over the last few years. What are your expectations going forward?
All right. I mean, I think that's a fair and right way of thinking, and the market obviously gets that as well. Ashaka Cement this year alone is up 80%, 85%. That's huge. Now, but if we step back a little bit and look at Nigeria as a whole, there's talk that the country is growing north of 7%, and the question is what drives that growth, really? And it's two major things. One is agric, and number two is telecoms. Now, within the agricultural space, there's no real pure play agric name out there that you can really go after if you wanted to play this agric exposure, besides probably your UACN of the world, for example. But they're probably more 50% agric, 50% property. So in that sense, you can't really do much. The second thing is telecoms. Top 2, top 3 telecom names in this company are not listed. And so it sort of handicaps you. So it now brings you to cement, which is sort of the other way to sort of play the aggressive growth that everyone sees coming out of this space. And I think that's one thing that's been going on really well for the cement space. The second thing is sort of the infrastructural, there's a lot of space and room for infrastructure to grow in this country. I mean, that's recognized right from the presidency all the way down, to the states and to the local government. So